It's easy to feel alone, to feel overwhelmed, to feel like everything's too much. So welcome to We Got You, because we want to help you. I'm Jeannette, a Latina mom living in Miami, and I'm going through as many things as you're going to. And I have two wonderful co-hosts, Debbie.
Hi, I'm Dr. G. I'm a family doctor and a resilience expert and a mom of 4. And this is such a difficult time for everybody, and it feels really useful to talk about it.
And I am Brian Copeland. I'm a writer and a playwright as well as a talk show host, and I am a father of 3 grown ones, so mine are out of the house. Can I stick my tongue out at the two of you, since you both have
That's just braggy. Yeah,
yeah, you're just bragging.
I have 2 God Almighty. Read last. What we're going to talk about today is something that everyone deals with, but nobody ever wants to discuss because it doesn't make you feel good, and that's failure. And I don't care who you are, you have failed at something. But I think the biggest problem that we have with failure is that we look at failure the wrong way. Somebody said something to me that's kind of stuck with me the last 5 years and has really changed it, how I look at it. And that is that failure is an opportunity to begin again more intelligently. That's what failure is. Yes. And
I love that.
There are lots of positive things. Now, I mean, you both look like you're in incredible shape, so I'm assuming you work out. What do they call it? You work out until your muscle hits failure. It's a good thing. It makes you stronger. So your thoughts on failure?
Well, Debbie is the resilience expert, but I've failed many more times than I've succeeded. But I think honestly that failure can be really good if you allow it to propel you, if it gives you momentum to do better, if it is really a learning experience. Debbie?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a normal part of the cycle. If you look at failure as something that you have to figure out how to overcome and it'll always be in your rearview mirror, I think that's setting yourself up to be really devastated by failure. What we're all saying is we're going to experience it. We got to find some ways to not feel so devastated by it, right?
And to look at it as a learning experience. I heard a quote the other day about Thomas Edison. You know how many times Edison tried to make the light bulb before it finally worked? 10,000. I mean, think about anything you want to do that you would be willing to continue trying 10,000 times, even if it didn't work. There are a few things I can think of. No, there's not. There's not one.
But isn't he quoted as saying that he didn't look at it as failing to do something 10,000 times. He looked at it as 10,000 things he learned about what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. A chance to begin again more intelligently.
I asked my readers, and I know you guys did too, what they wanted to talk about failure. And like a lot of the questions I put up for our show, I kind of put it out there wondering if people would feel safe enough. And I was amazed. I got 188 comments on the question, wow. What's making you feel like you're failing right now? And people kept saying, wow, we must have really needed to talk about this. One of the questions that I thought was really valuable was someone who said, what am I supposed to do with failure when I keep feeling like I look at what's going on, I adapt to it, I set my company, in this case, it's a summer camp, up for success in the current circumstances, and then they move the goalposts, the rules change. And so I keep feeling like I'm failing due to things that are totally beyond my control.
Wow. Well, I got about 75. I was surprised. I thought nobody's going to answer this question. Nobody wants to admit to failure. And I got a comment from Michelle who says that her failure is keeping my house clean. I can't seem to get there, and I don't know why. Maybe it's too much of it is anxiety.
Yeah, you guys are looking at the 6 square feet of clean house that I have right now on this camera. That's it. That's what you got.
Are there dishes in your sink?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I actually also asked a question, but people weren't so forthcoming in public. But the messages that I got, I actually felt so sad, just because I had moms telling me that they feel that they're failing as parents. They have no patience. They suck at online teaching. They don't know how to do homework with their kids. They feel that they're failing themselves because they're not taking care of themselves. They're not sleeping well. Many of them have gained weight because they've been eating out of anxiety. So I feel that failure was alongside a sense of overwhelm that it was really overtaking a lot of my community members and the people who took the time to reply to me. And I really feel that they needed to vent. So I think that's why, Debbie, you got so many people commenting on your post, because they really needed to feel that they're not alone. And that's why we're here today. We really want to help each other. We want people to feel connected. We understand, and we got you.
Failure is a lonely experience. Not only can you feel isolated, you can start to feel desperate. Our next guest says those are the moments when you really need to reconnect with people, to get back to some human contact. Here to tell us more about that is author and speaker Thom Singer. Hi, Thom.
Hey, Dr. G, how are you today?
I'm great. And I really want to introduce you to my co-hosts, Jeannette and Brian Copeland.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hi, Thom. So glad to have you with us today.
Glad to be here.
Thom, I asked you to be here because I have always been impressed when I have met with you in person or seen you from the stage. You've always been willing to be really authentic and talk about what's gone well in your life and what blessings and privileges you've had, and also the struggles that you've had. So I'm going to dive in with a really deeply revealing question, and I'm trusting you to stick with me. What is the hardest thing you have ever been through personally?
Wow, the hardest thing for me, I think it would probably have to be when I was 15 years old and my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And this was back in the 1980s when you didn't talk about such things. It was cancer. And she died when I was 18. So that was probably an early line of having to deal with something that was really tough.
Did you feel any guilt or blame in that? I mean, we all know, and we're all parents, the four of us, so we know like we would never want our child to feel guilty in that moment. But when you're 15, the entire world revolves around you. So did you experience any sense of having done something wrong in that?
I didn't feel a personal feel to that, but it was devastating. And my father was very pragmatic. And he always told me, you know what? You got dealt the short straw with this deal, with this illness, and you just have to sort of suck it up and deal with it. And I don't know if that was the most coddling way to help me through it, but looking back, he was right. There was nothing I could have done about it, and it wasn't my fault.
So how has going through that experience informed other times in your life where things have been really hard?
Well, in life, we have ups and downs, right? So I've had career setbacks and I've had other things in my family that have happened. My youngest daughter was born with a birth defect and had to have some pretty serious surgery when she was 6 months old.
On her head, right?
Yeah, she had to have the bones in her skull removed so that her brain could grow properly. So that was pretty horrific. But one of the things I did in that time was I realized that I'd been through something horrible before. And you know what? Things happen the way they happen, and you just have to push through and see where it takes you. And so it wasn't any fun while you go through it, but I was able to get to the other side. And I've taken those lessons into my career as well.
Is that how you're able to get through it, just by looking at things and saying, I've been through worse than this? Because I relate to you. I lost my mother when I was 14 years old too. And it is it's an incomprehensible thing, first of all, that you're going to lose a parent. And then when you do, it becomes, this is the worst thing that will ever happen to me. And unfortunately, sometimes it isn't. So does that help you to go, I've been through worse than this? Or is there some other mindset that would be valuable?
Yeah, I think when I've looked at some horrible situations, what's come out the other side is some really good situations. So my mom died right after I went away to college. But when I look back at those let's be honest, 5.5 years that I was in college, I had some great times and I made some great friends. And while you can't replace what's lost, you can move forward and have good experiences. So I've tried to hold the juxtaposition of that time from like 18 to 22. There was really bad and there was really good. And the bad is usually followed by some sort of uptick down the line.
That always helps you carry through, right? But a lot of people actually also find comfort in making plans. Are you a planner? Do you tend to plan for different scenarios and think of different outcomes and how you can prepare for them?
Yeah, I think I like to look at, what's the worst case scenario that can happen. But the downside of that is then you can get into a spiral of it. So I tend to be a glasses half full kind of person. I prepare for something could go wrong or I could get derailed. And at the same time, I hope for the best, and I look for the highs rather than the lows.
You being a speaker, like we all get sucker punched by what has happened with the economy and having to be locked down depending upon where it is that you are. So how did you manage that? You have to be out in front of crowds to do what it is that you do. And this came out of nowhere. You're the glass is half full. I'm the who took my glass. That's the difference between you and I.
Where'd my glass go?
Yeah. Well, the glass was shattered back in March. In fact, I call March 13th the day my business died. I was prepared after 11 years of being a full-time professional speaker and master of ceremonies. I was prepared for the best year of my career. And then on March 13th, everything started to cancel. And that has just continued for the past, 9 or 10 months now. So yeah, I watched all of my income for this year just get ripped away from me. And that was in my career, probably the most horrible thing. After spending more than a decade building my business, there was nothing I could do with the fact that the meetings business, which is where I make my living, absolutely went away.
And see, how could you plan for that? How could you possibly have a plan B that, you plan for a lot of things, but you can't plan for a once in a century pandemic.
Yeah, I was not prepared for a global pandemic. I mean, there's ups and there's downs in the economy, and you get scrappy and you figured out how to do things. But to have all your business cancel and then have very little other opportunities to be able to earn a living, you can't prepare for that. And I guess the only way you could prepare for it is just to have a big pile of money sitting in the corner so that you can ride through it. And I didn't necessarily have that set up either. So you just have to push through and figure out, what do I do next?
And how do you avoid looking at that as a personal failure, right? Because it's very hard. We're so attached to viewing our success as the success of our business or what we do. And when you can't do what you're passionate about, what brings in your income, how do you avoid feeling a personal sense of failure?
Well, that's a great question, because I, for better or worse, had tied a lot of my personal identity to the career that I had. I liked being a speaker. I liked being on stage. I liked working with corporations and associations. And when it was ripped away from me, there was a big call to just sit in the corner and crawl up in the fetal position and cry. But I also have a family to support. I had a daughter who was a senior in high school, ready to go to college. And colleges still want their tuition money, whether there's a global pandemic or not. And I had to figure it out.
I totally get it, Thom, because I also have a college student, but also so many people are just trying to pay their grocery bill or just pay their monthly rent and not be evicted. So it's such a struggle for so many people right now.
I knew just from other ups and downs of life that this was going to be a down, but on the other side of this, there's going to be some great career years ahead of me. I'm only 54 years old. I have a long way to go. So I've gotten creative.
How?
So two things. One is I took a job with a company. So I'm working doing business development for an executive search firm. In addition to that, I've kept my speaking business alive by pivoting to doing virtual events. Now, I'll be honest, there's not as many of them. They don't pay as much. And the competition is extremely fierce to get the few little morsels that are out there. But I'm at the plate and I'm swinging.
That's amazing. Like, if you had two pieces of advice for us and for everybody who's watching, who might be in the same situation, trying to pivot, what would you tell them?
So my first tip is to remember that all opportunities in life come from people. So you have to reach out and connect with people. And the second tip is be honest, be transparent. So often we live in this world where people think, hey, you got to fake it till you make it. Never show anybody your weakness. But this pandemic has been hard. And if you've been knocked off course and if you're struggling, you don't want to be Eeyore and be gloom and doom, but it's okay to be transparent and let the people in your network know that you're having a rough time and you need some ideas.
I think transparency is great. I think that it's important. And I think that when you're honest with people and you're open with people and you give them a part of yourself, they can't help but give you a part of them. So it's one of the most valuable things I found in my life is just be transparent.
I love the idea that you should reach out to your network, but what if you don't know who your network is? You just don't feel like you have a network of people.
It's everywhere. Obviously, it's people who you've dealt with face to face at your job, in school, with your neighbors. But we also live in this fascinating world where we have social media. So there are people who you've connected with and maybe either kept relationships alive or created them on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or through YouTube. And so you want to remember that on the other side of those likes, links, shares, and follows, there are people, and those are people you can build relationships with. And most people, if you turn to them and let them know what your situation is, most people want to help. One of the things I did is I created a program for myself that every day I tried to reach out to at least one smart person. And part of that was just I checked in and saw how they were doing. But at the end of the conversation, I would say, okay, part of the purpose of this call is I'm looking for ideas. And I've done this with dozens, gosh, probably hundreds of people by now. And
I love this.
I'll be honest. Most people did not have great ideas. Some people had no ideas. Some people had ideas I already had thought of, but about 4 or 5 people came up with ideas that I've been able to put into action and have helped me move the ball forward.
And did you find yourself helping them too?
Oh, absolutely. Because here's the thing. Everybody has been impacted by this pandemic. Now, some people have only been impacted by the fact that they've had to move home and homeschool their kids. Their paycheck is still coming. Nothing else has been disrupted. Other people, like people who work in the meetings business, the hotel industry, the travel industry. I have a friend who took a job with a cruise ship company doing like large sales for them February 1st.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So people in all types of industries. I mean, that was like a dream job for him for about 5 weeks. And then he was laid off. So everybody needs something. And sometimes people just need to know that someone sees them. You know, we have this epidemic of loneliness in our society, where even though we have all these great tools, these social media tools and likes, links, shares, and follows, people just need to know sometimes that you see them. So yeah, I tried to provide for them. And sometimes it was just asking them if they're okay.
I so appreciate that. And I want to end our time with you there, because that concept that it is about the human connection and knowing that other people are interested in how you're doing, and that by noticing other people, you are by definition doing good, that really helps a lot. And I really appreciate your point that on the other side of anything you're going through, whether it's good or bad, is the other thing. So that idea that change has just happened to you and more change will happen to you, and you just got to hang on for it. That really helps me. And I found that really encouraging as well. Thom, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
You know what a lot of people don't realize is that failure can actually be useful if you know how to use it correctly. There are a lot of myths about what it means to fail. So let's go to our resident expert on pretty much dispelling any myth about anything, Dr. G.
Have you guys thought about when things aren't going well, what hits you like it's your own failure, and what just seems like, oh, that's a hard thing that happened? Like if you get a flat tire or something, you might not feel like you failed. But I mean, even recently, Monday I'm in the office seeing patients. I'm looking at a patient trying to decide, do I send this person to the ER? And that patient ended up going to the ICU. That feels to me like a failure, because in the medical culture, the idea that a patient needs that kind of acute care that fast means I must have missed something, or they were sicker than they should have been. I shouldn't have been able to let them get. We have this connection between failure and blame. And one of the reasons that people have such struggle talking about failure, touching just the idea that someone that they love or themselves could have failed, is that we tie failure and blame together really tightly. And one of the myths about failure is that failure requires blame, that if there's a failure, you have to figure out who to blame. It turns out actually that some failure is praiseworthy. So here's an example that I saw that a scientist put that I really liked. If you were doing, and I'm going to put it in pandemic terms, if you were at a job interview on Zoom and you told your kids, you got to be really, really quiet because while I do this, and one kid turned on the TV and the other one yelled at them whenever they failed, and there's some blame there, right? You're looking at your tweens or your teens and being like, hey, but if while they were supposed to be really quiet, one of them yelled because another one was choking, that would be praiseworthy. That would be a praiseworthy reason to have failed at that thing. So when you can have this spectrum idea of like, where was, and the scientist in this article laid it out really nicely about how you figure out where on the spectrum from blameworthy to praiseworthy a failure is. But taking that idea that we don't always have to tie failure to blame, that's one myth that can really, when we bust it, it can really help us overcome our aversion to failure.
Well, I think that is very powerful, because we tend to think that there's more that I could have done. Whenever there's a sense of failure, there's like, I should have been able to know that this patient required urgent care, or I should have realized that the kids might be choking and that I should have done something correct. So that sense of identifying that there are certain things that you can look at it from a different perspective can be really helpful. But I also think that we tend to look at failure as something negative instead of looking at it as something positive, in the sense that it's a lesson. I think another word for failure is lesson learned. And once you start looking at it that way, I feel it empowers you instead of making you feel lessened or imperfect, or that you did something really wrong that deserves blame.
The second myth is this idea that we only fail until that first time we succeed. I've heard the comment that success is falling down 7 times, getting up 8. But that gives us this idea that after you finally do succeed, you break the ribbon and that's it. Everything will be success from then on. And that's not how it works. J.K. Rowling submitted her manuscript 12 times and then the 13th time Harry Potter was accepted and published. Well, that's the whole story that we hear to teach people how to overcome failure, when probably we know that J.K. Rowling's will have failures after that as well.
And see, that's the whole thing, is we never really hear about or think about all the times that an author sold books out of the trunk of their car, trying to make it, or the recording artist that's now won all these Grammys, who's been around for 10 years selling CDs, out the back of the car at somebody else's concert. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you only fail if you quit. That reminds me of the old show business saying about it takes 20 years to make an overnight success. Nobody sees the 20 years that you failed, that you quote unquote failed at trying to succeed. They just see when you finally hit your success that, boy, they came out of nowhere.
But then also you get the where are they now? So they succeeded, but then they had some failure afterwards. And then they reinvented themselves and had some success. And you don't hear about everybody, but I really feel strongly, thinking about failure, that if we don't think about it as cyclical, we won't get anywhere. I hope that none of my patients who might hear this are going to be really dismayed by this, but I bombed my first major test of medical school. I mean, failed it so badly. It was 6 weeks of learning and then a test. And I failed that test so badly that I called my mom and I said, I think this was a mistake. Not that I don't want it, not that I'm not willing to work for medical school, but I am tremendously bad at it. And I think it was, remember, I came from theater to medicine. So a lot of people thought it might be a mistake. And my mom said to me, yeah, I wouldn't jump so fast. She said, you did terribly your first semester of high school and your first semester of college. And I was like, oh yeah. She said, this is just your pattern. It takes you a while to get used to something, to learn how to be more successful. You'll fail at things again in the future too. And I was like, oh, that's weirdly discouraging and encouraging all at once.
Well, it's important to know that growth does not go like in a straight line, right? Success does not happen this way. It's like this. We tend to grow, but we go down, then we go up. It's like a spiral. As long as the spiral is trending upwards, you're fine. But we have to be okay with the notion that we are going to have setbacks and that we are going to fail to be able to move forward. It's going to propel you.
That you use the word setback, because that's it. That's really all it is it's a setback. You only truly fail if you quit. That's the only time that you can ever really truly fail. Otherwise, it's exactly like you said. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But you still have the 1 step forward out of the 2, so you take it and you move on.
So if we can stop looking at failure as an end event, if it teaches us something, then it's a growth event.
An important part of We Got You is to help you deal with all the issues in a way that's more constructive. And that's why we want to share with you a few hacks that can help you deal better with failure, with setbacks, however you want to call them.
Well, one of the things that helps me, and so I'll call it a hack, is that when there is something that happens that I would consider to be a failure, something that didn't meet expectations, I like to think on paper. I'll get a legal pad and I'll write down everything I can think about that went wrong, and then analyze it further and think, okay, why did this go wrong? And then once I've identified those things, then try it again and see if I get a different result.
That's really smart. That takes a lot of discipline, I feel like, to be able to dissect it like that.
And I'm a disciplined because it's hard.
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm going to analyze this so I don't cry about this. We'll put it that way.
Brian, I love what you're saying about how you do that so you don't cry about it. For me, I try to laugh about it, like laugh at myself instead of crying about it, which I can actually totally do both. But I'll take whatever happened, whatever dumb thing I did, or how I messed up, or how the Zoom microphone was on and I said the embarrassing thing and everybody heard it. And I'll try to turn it into a funny story for my kids, because that way, I don't even have to exaggerate it. I messed up. And that way, at least when I feel like I failed about the thing that I did really badly, at least I feel like I'm kind of side benefit winning as a mom, because I'm showing my kids this is one way to deal with failure, and I mess up for sure. And it makes it easier for them to tell me when they feel like they failed. And so sometimes taking those moments that at that time, like arguing with the police officer, like, why was I doing that when I absolutely had an expired, cert registration on my car? So even though it feels awful, I tell my kids about it, and I kind of not exaggerate, but I really own how I messed up. And we all get to laugh about it. And it gives them a touch point for telling me about their own failures.
I love that. And for me, though, it's like a two-step process. Instead of fighting what I'm feeling in that moment in which I feel that I failed, I give myself time, not too much, 24, 48 hours at the most, to feel frustrated, maybe angry at myself, sad sometimes because I didn't get what I wanted or what I needed or what I thought I needed, because sometimes we have this misconception of what might be best for us. And then I find the lesson. For me, it's always about finding the lesson so I can avoid making the same mistake that led me through a path that was not productive at all.
Reminds me of something I told my daughter when my daughter had her first breakup. And that was, okay, here's what you can do. She was 14 or 15 years old, and first love, first relationships. And I said, here's what you can do. I'm going to let you stay home from school and feel sorry for yourself for one day. And then after that day after tomorrow, life goes on. And it's back to normal. And it worked so well that I do that myself. Okay, this didn't go well. I feel terribly about how badly this went. Okay, I can feel sorry for myself for one day.
That is so helpful. Yeah.
Are you going to yell at the cop because your registration is paid this time? You yell at the cop and it's your registration? I would have loved to have heard that argument.
Well, and it's the most white privilege thing ever to have done, right? I was young and it didn't occur to me that I was digging myself in deeper. And like everything about that now, I just cringe about. But in the moment, I wanted to lie to my family about it. I wanted to pretend it had never happened, and it happened. It so happened.
But did it happen again?
No.
You see? You learned the lesson.
Yes. Lesson learned. Extra fines paid. Lesson learned.
Okay, this is the point where we come to what have we learned today? And here's what it is I've learned about failure today. And that is, if you aren't failing, it means you're not trying hard enough. Because every time you fail, you're going to eventually see success because you learn something. So failing a lot, it's a good thing. It means you're learning a lot. It means you're growing.
So I'm going to push back, because I really think that this idea, Brian, that you've said about how, like, you gotta, the only way you really fail is by quitting. I think sometimes the lesson learned from failure is to pivot, to try something else. That sometimes the lesson learned can be, what did I really want? And can I go a totally different way to try and get it? I really learned a lot today from our guest and from our conversation about this idea. And I like that image of the swirling sort of things are always moving, but if you can keep it on an upward trajectory, then even when you're on the downswing towards a setback, or you got knocked off course towards a setback, remember that if you keep some forward motion, you can get going in a positive way again, and know that failure will come around again. So every time you deal with it, maybe you get a little better for the next time that you have to deal with it.
Yeah. And I also learned today two things. One, failure is temporary, it's not final. So we have to stop thinking that it's an end to all things, right? And the second is that we can recover from failure. We can learn from failure. We can do better, whether it's pivoting, whether it's changing something in our lives. And it all goes back to connecting to people. I loved what Thom, our guest, was saying. We need to keep that sense of connection because we all know somebody that can help us, but we need to allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to ask for help. So asking for help is not something that makes you weaker. It's actually a sign of strength. And failing, as Brian likes to say, is also a sign of strength because it means you're trying.
Well, that is our show for today. Thank you very, very much for joining us. And remember, we got you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of We Got You. You can like and subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on social media. You can find me at Ask Dr. G pretty much everywhere. And my website is askdrg.com.
My name is Jeannette Kaploon. You can find me at Jeannette Kaploon and read my blog, hispanaglobal.net.
You can find me on Twitter at Brian Copey, or you can go to briancopeland.com. And remember, we got you.